Okay, so let's dive into what's going on in Yemen because it's definitely a complex situation,
Yeah.
especially with these recent reports of airstrikes hitting Sana'a, the capital,
Right.
in the last 24 hours.
Mm.
And one of the reported targets, this is what's crazy to me, was the September 21 park
A park.
in the main district, a park.
Wow.
So in this deep dive, we're gonna try to figure out like what's actually happening, who's behind it all,
Right.
and what this means not just for Yemen but for the entire region because
Mhm.
this isn't an isolated thing. This is tied to Gaza, Israel, the U.S., Britain,
All connected.
and then potentially even countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. It's a lot.
It really is. It's like it's fascinating how this is all unfolding on so many different levels. Like on the surface, you see airstrikes,
Right.
but underneath that, there's this much bigger struggle going on. You have international alliances, regional power dynamics, this fight for influence in the Middle East.
A
Um
lot.
it's a lot to unpack. Yeah.
So let's just start with the airstrikes.
Okay.
Early reports, they suggest that the U.S. and Britain might be behind them
Mm-hmm.
with this focus on Sinai.
Right.
But like targeting a park? That seems, I don't know, that seems kind of strange, right?
Yeah, it definitely raises some questions. Now, Israel's Channel 12, they're suggesting that the U.S. might be leading the charge here,
Okay.
and they think it might be in response to the Houthi group launching missiles toward Israel.
Houthis.
Yeah.
Right. So to understand all this, we need to like take a step back and understand who the Houthis are.
Yeah.
Basically, they're this rebel group that controls a large part of Yemen, including the capital.
Mm-hmm.
They've been fighting this civil war against the Yemeni government, which is backed by Saudi Arabia.
Right.
But why would they be firing missiles at Israel? That's the thing that seems strange to me.
Well, the Houthis, they see themselves as aligned with the Palestinian cause in Gaza, and they view Israel as like a common enemy.
Yeah.
So their attacks, they're probably meant to like, show solidarity with Gaza and put pressure on Israel.
So it's like this whole web of allegiances and rivalries,
Exactly. It's very
and
complex.
and they're very open about their intentions. Like one of their top officials, his name is Nasser al-Din Amer, he has publicly said, quote, "We will never abandon Gaza,"
Wow.
and that their actions will continue escalating until the violence in Gaza stops. Like it's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and it makes you wonder, are we seeing like the emergence of a unified front against Israel's actions in Gaza?
Mhm.
Could groups like the Houthis be joining the fight in a more coordinated way? And if so, like what does this mean for how this conflict could potentially escalate?
That's a scary thought.
It is a concerning development.
But let's lay a look at this from the other side for a second.
Okay.
The U.S. and Israel's perspective.
Oh.
John Kirby, who's the White House National Security Council spokesperson, he's labeled the Houthis as a threat to international stability.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been very vocal about the U.S.'s commitment to weakening their ability to disrupt global shipping lanes.
And this is where you, the listener, might be thinking, okay, why should I care about international shipping?
Right.
Well, here's why. A lot of the world depends on these maritime routes for trade, right? So any disruption to those routes
Right.
that could lead to shortages, price hikes, and just a domino effect on the global economy, it can affect everyone.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even if a conflict seems far away,
Yeah,
it can have these really big consequences that we all feel.
absolutely.
And then, of course, there's the human cost. Like 18 civilians in Israel were injured while trying to find safety after a Houthi-launched missile was intercepted.
Oh, wow.
So, it really shows you that the consequences of this violence, they don't stop at any border.
They ripple outward. And it seems like Israel's, they're not just sitting back, they're taking a proactive approach here.
Right.
There are reports that their security agencies are actually getting ready for a long fight.
Oh, wow.
Like preparing for a prolonged confrontation.
Okay.
And that includes, plans to target the Houthi leadership.
So more airstrikes,
Mhm.
more, taking out key figures. But wouldn't that just make things worse? Like, wasn't that risk escalating things even further?
Yeah, that's a valid concern for sure.
Right.
I mean, some people argue that these actions are necessary,
Right.
to kind of deter further aggression, protect their interests.
Mhm.
But others worry that it's just going to lead to more violence, more instability,
Mhm.
and some analysts are even saying that these strikes could go on for months.
Months.
Yeah, which suggests that, this is not going to be a quick resolution.
This is where it gets really complicated, right?
Yeah.
We've got the Houthis in Yemen firing missiles at Israel to support Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the U.S. and Britain potentially carrying out these airstrikes in Yemen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We've got Israel planning to target Houthi leaders. It feels like we're on this path towards a much bigger conflict.
Yeah, the situation is it's very volatile for sure.
Yeah.
It's almost like, you have this tangled web,
Mm-hmm.
and any little thing could set it off.
Right, and we haven't even talked about all the other players.
Oh, that's true.
Like what about Iran? What about Saudi Arabia? What about Qatar?
Right, yeah. So with Iran, I mean, they've been a longtime supporter of the Houthis, right?
Yeah.
Providing them with weapons, training, financial aid.
Mm-hmm.
Some experts even think that Iranian-made drones and missiles are being used in these attacks against Israel.
Wow.
So their involvement could really raise the stakes significantly.
And then you've got Saudi Arabia. They're leading the coalition against the Houthis in Yemen.
Exactly.
Like they obviously have a big interest in seeing this conflict resolved in their favor.
Yeah, for sure. And that adds, another layer of complexity to the whole thing.
It really does.
And then you've got Qatar, who've tried to act as a mediator in the region.
Right.
But, with tensions this high, it's hard to say how effective any kind of mediation could really be at this point.
It sounds like the whole region's just this powder keg ready to explode.
Yeah, it's a very delicate situation.
But could this be the thing that starts a wider war in the Middle East?
Potential for a wider conflict it's a serious concern, I think.
Yeah.
The situation is extremely fragile.
Okay.
And any misstep, any miscalculation, it could have just disastrous consequences.
Wow.
And this is why people are calling for a diplomatic solution.
Right.
Urgently, but finding a path to peace in a region with so much animosity, so much mistrust, it's a huge challenge.
So okay, let's step back for a minute, try to kind of summarize this for our listeners.
Okay.
We had this tangled web of alliances, all these simmering tensions,
Mm.
and then this looming threat of a bigger war.
Right.
Like what are the key takeaways here?
Well, I think the biggest thing to understand is just how connected it all is.
Yeah.
The conflict in Yemen, it's not happening in a vacuum.
Right.
It's tied to the situation in Gaza, it's tied to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's tied to, all these broader geopolitical dynamics in the region.
It's like this ripple effect.
Yeah, exactly.
One action in one place can trigger these consequences across the entire region.
Absolutely. And even the world. And this kind of brings us back to that strange detail we mentioned earlier, the park being targeted in an airstrike.
Wow.
And while we don't know for sure why they targeted the park, it's almost like a symbol,
Right.
It shows that this conflict, it's not just happening on battlefields,
Well,
it's reaching into everyday life, it's affecting ordinary people.
It's a tragic reminder that war has this human cost, and that violence doesn't discriminate.
Absolutely.
And so it makes you wonder, right? Like if airstrikes, if targeting leaders, if that hasn't stopped the violence so far, what will? Yeah,
that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
It really is.
If these conventional approaches aren't working, what are the other options?
Yeah.
It's something that requires a lot of careful thought.
Right.
There aren't easy answers.
Right.
There aren't quick fixes, but I think recognizing how complex this is, understanding everyone's motivations, all the players,
Mm-hmm.
and really grasping the potential consequences of just doing nothing, those are crucial first steps towards finding a way forward.
I think we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
Oh, yeah.
We've explored the conflict in Yemen,
Yeah.
how it's connected to Gaza and Israel,
Mm-hmm.
the role of global powers,
Right.
and the scary possibility of this wider war in the region.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But I hope our listeners now have a better understanding of who the key players are, what they want, and what's at stake here.
I hope so too.
Because this is a really precarious situation.
Yeah. It's interesting when we think about the Houthis and their goals, it's easy to, get caught up in the immediate conflict.
Right.
But what are they actually fighting for in Yemen itself? Like, what's their end game?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something we don't really talk about a lot
Right.
when we talk about, all this stuff.
Exactly. And the Houthis, they have their own like complex agenda within Yemen.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about Gaza, right? They claim to be fighting against, you know, corruption for social justice,
Right.
but then, they've also been accused of human rights abuses and being kind of authoritarian themselves. So,
Right. So there's a lot going on there.
yeah, and their goals in Yemen, they're kind of tied up with their ambitions in the region, with how they see Israel as a threat.
Mm.
It's all connected.
So it's not like they're just this one group with one clear objective.
Well, no, not at all.
They have, internal divisions, different factions, and their goals might even change depending on what's happening.
Exactly, yeah, and that makes it really hard to figure out what they're going to do next.
Right.
What their motivations are, and it makes it harder to negotiate with them, to find any kind of common ground.
Right. Speaking of negotiations, we talked about, Qatar trying to be a mediator.
Mm-hmm.
But with all these different interests, all this mistrust,
Yeah.
is there any real chance for a diplomatic solution here?
It's a long shot,
Yeah.
but history shows us that even the worst conflicts, the ones that seem impossible to solve, they can sometimes be resolved through dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
However unlikely that might seem right now, the key is to find a way to address everyone's core concerns.
Right.
All the parties involved,
Mm-hmm.
create a sense of security, fairness, a path toward a future where everyone's working together instead of fighting.
That sounds really difficult, especially in the Middle East.
It is, but think about it. Every war ends eventually, right?
Yeah.
The question is how much suffering will there be before we get to that point?
Yeah.
How many lives will be lost? How many communities will be destroyed? So pursuing peace, it's hard, it's often thankless,
Right.
but it's absolutely necessary.
It's not just some like feel good idea.
Yeah.
It's about real people's lives.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive has really been about.
Yeah.
We've looked at the conflict in Yemen, its connections to Gaza, to the Middle East as a whole,
Right.
the role of global powers, and the terrifying possibility of a much wider war.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. But understanding how complex it is, all the different forces at play, that's the first step towards doing something,
Right.
towards finding solutions, towards building a more peaceful future.
So we want to leave our listeners with a challenge.
Yeah.
Don't just listen to this and forget about it. Engage with it.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. Question it.
Right.
Explore different perspectives.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, peace anywhere in the world,
Mm-hmm.
it requires people to be informed, to be engaged.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're all about.
That's what we hope to achieve with this deep dive.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us on this journey.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And we hope to see you next time for another deep dive.